Ko Emma Horgan, Heke aho. I'm from Sustainable Hawke's Bay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what happened in Cyclone Gabrielle and what we learned from that. So in February of this year, actually I'll see a little bit of context on the history of Hawke's Bay and our wetlands and biodiversity. So 98% of our wetlands and 77% of our indigenous forest has gone in Hawke's Bay. We've narrowed our rivers, we've built on historic riverbeds and wetlands, and in February this year, Papa Tuanuku told us that this was not what we should be doing. So in February, 550 millimetres fell on Hawke's Bay, resulting in extensive flooding, 30 stock bank breaches, and others overtopped. 10 of the bridges were lost and many were damaged. As communities, we were cut off from each other. So within Hawke's Bay, we've got 4 districts. That's Napier, Hastings, Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay. We could not get between those. So we waited for a couple of days to see what would happen with civil defence. We received lots of feedback from our communities that they weren't being reached. We weren't ready as a region for what happened, and as a result, many of our communities had not been reached. The response was not adequate for what needed to happen across the 4 districts. So we were receiving growing response hour on hour, and we needed to do something. We reached out to 3 networks that we belong to: Environment Hubs Aotearoa, Community Energy Network, and Zero Waste Network. Under these networks, there's 142 organisations. We asked for help with water, food, clothing, other essentials. And we expected to get a response that would help us open a hub so that we could deal with our community in Hastings. It started as a trickle. We received in clothes, food, and all the other essentials. But then it turned into a bit of a waterfall. So not only was it a waterfall in the sense that our community, our surrounding community locally needed help, we knew that there was more beyond that. So we actually started a logistics team, and we had to open a warehouse. And from that, we received from all over New Zealand and a massive amount of support. We also had 280 volunteers sign up to help. And so the response grew and grew day on day. We then realised that hot food was needed. There was no way to cook, there was no electricity. And so we put a call out for volunteers and to help with the food. We got responses from businesses that had barbecues, from volunteers that came out from region, from Sikh temples who had commercial kitchens. And through that, we helped facilitate 22,000 meals into the community over the cyclone period. So in terms of our response as an organisation, we estimate that we got 22,000 meals into the community. We supported 64 communities, and we did that via helicopter, 4-wheel drive, truck, and boat. So what happened in our communities? We really weren't ready for this level of catastrophe, I guess you'd call it. So our communities largely had to fend for themselves, and I imagine this is what's coming in the future. So we looked at how we could do that. In terms of, I'll go through some of the things that we've learnt. So waste, centralised waste doesn't work in these types of situations, and it won't work in the future. So we had piles and piles of waste for weeks, and you can't imagine the stench from all the rotting food, and you wouldn't have thought after 2 or 3 days that's what was going to happen as you walk down the streets. We also learnt from disaster response that there's a huge amount of waste. So we were, some of the organisations surrounding us were sent truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of clothes from well-meaning communities. But many of it was not useful. I mean, you can't wear a ball gown in a disaster. So, we've learned that we wouldn't do things the way that we did, but we did manage what came into us, and we did not have a great deal of waste at the end. We've also learnt that waste, in terms of when you're getting essentials to the communities, is extensive. So a lot of the water infrastructure, which I'll talk about shortly, did not work. And so there were plastic bottles on the thousands and thousands going out into the communities. And as an organisation that promotes the top of the waste hierarchy, that was devastating. And so in terms of drinking water failed for many reasons. It might be that you needed to boil it in some regions. It might be that the rural regions, the river systems took out the infrastructure to get water into tanks, or tanks were washed away. So we were highly dependent and unprepared for the amount of water that we had to move around the region without roads. In terms of shelter, there were thousands of people were displaced, and so we had pop-up centres and so many marae, halls, communities really rose to the challenge and created beds for those people. In terms of food security, we learnt, as we have learnt during COVID-19, we are not secure for food within Hawke's Bay. We are highly dependent on our road networks and our supermarkets. And what we saw was queues of people at supermarkets, supermarkets not opening. And we also realised how much food we export from the region, and we do not grow enough. So communications, which I've spelled wrong by the look of it, communications, we had no communications for a week, and in some cases 2 or 3 weeks in other communities. And energy, we in central CBD were without power for a week, and some communities were without power for months. So what we are doing now, so as an organisation, we are turning our focus to the future and looking at how we can help our communities. So we've chosen eight communities to work with. We've tailoring existing community resilience methodology that we have, and we're getting ready to work with 8 communities to support them to grow leaders within their communities, and we'll walk alongside them with the vision of helping those communities be ready for climate change and a resilient future. We're going to learn and adapt that framework as we move forward. And we've also started a food resiliency network across 20 organisations, both at a grassroots level, council, Te Whatu Ora, across the board. And so as an organisation, we're facilitating that to meet monthly with the idea of creating a regional food resilience strategy and work plan from that. And then on the side, actually pulling together quick wins, so it's not just all talk. And so within that context, we will choose a project every month to work on to start bringing about localised food resiliency. It might be helping at one school grow their food, and then cook and ensure zero waste, and using that as a model to teach other schools to replicate. It might be that we look at community gardens that aren't thriving yet and we put systems around them to help them do that. It might be that we look at the trees that have much fruit left at the end of the season and negotiate with growers to pick that and work with an EIT to cook that and then send it to Nourish to Nil to get it out via our food rescue system. So we're looking for true projects that can bring about change. We're also starting monthly education sessions on water, energy, transport, food, degrowth economy, biodiversity. And we're advocating for our rivers to have room to move and for the restoration of biodiversity, and actually starting active projects in this space. These are my basic thoughts on recovery and resiliency. So our rebuild is not thinking about what we need to look like in the future. It's restoring old infrastructure in the same place, centralised waste systems, bridges and roads next to the sea and next to the river that hasn't got room to move. We have recently in the last week heard from our councils that we are not going to do much unplanned retreat at this stage, and we will put that off until 2065. Which is a little alarming. Our power structures, councils and industry will not take the lead in this. It's up to us as community in the grassroots level to do it. We are seeing worldwide that there are more fires, floods, This is urgent, it's not something that can wait. And it's not something that can be done by one organisation or one council, it's something that we need to create networks of communities that can do it for themselves with the right knowledge of what's coming and what can work or possibly work given what we know at this point. The top-down won't work. We cannot wait for the cavalry, and we need to do it ourselves. So next steps. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we belong to EHAL, which is Environment Hubs Aotearoa, and you would have seen from the picture there were Community Energy Network and Zero Waste Network. So across those organisations, there's 142 hubs. So we would like to work more in talking about what could happen within those hubs. Many of the hubs are already focused on community resiliency, environment restoration, and systems change. So we would like to see more investment in our local community hubs and our networks, and more partnerships to grow what we do. That's me.